Today I will be presenting my paper, The Diffusion of Ideas. I've had the terrible idea of dividing it into two parts. So the first part is the actual paper. The second part is what I'm currently working on. And I'm including this not because I should be presenting it, but one, to give Adam some entertainment because he has seen this paper multiple times before. And second, because I'm going a bit OCD on it, so it would be good to have some feedback on what I'm currently working on. But focus will be on the first part, which is an actual paper. So the motivation for this project was that I'm interested in understanding how new ideas emerge, how new knowledge is created, and how these new ideas and new knowledge diffuse across space. Now, why is this important? Well, within the economics literature, for instance, new knowledge and the flow of innovation and the flow of ideas has been identified as a key factor for long-term growth and economic development. And also for centuries, there has been this hypothesis or narrative that one of the reasons why Europe grew first, like it was the first continent to actually develop and industrialize and modernize, is because of the connections between scholars across cities and the fact that there was no single authority that was able to stop ideas. So once ideas were created, they couldn't be stopped and they would flow across the continent. However, while this explanation has existed for centuries, only recently, I believe we have the data and the tools to test this at large scale. So this is the goal of the project, is providing new data and new measures to understand how ideas diffuse across space and what are the consequences of that. So also taking a very broad and long-term perspective. So if you think about the last 200 or 300 years in Western history, you'd see that innovation has really come at a rate that was unprecedented in history. And this has come together with a modern way of producing knowledge, by which I mean the fact that scholars, so idea producers are specialized, they're located in the same place, so think of clusters. They have clear ways, we have clear ways of producing and accumulating and distributing the knowledge that we produce. Now, historians of science agree that a main contributor to this modern way of producing knowledge was Germany in the 19th century. So as a matter of fact, this is where, we heard this morning, the research university was created, modern disciplines where some disciplines in the form that we know them today were invented, and also some major contributions in all fields of knowledge. And in fact, so we tend to forget this because then the Nazis destroyed the system for the most part. But before the rise of the Nazis, Germany had won more Nobel Prize than any other country, even more than the US and the UK combined. So the question is, how did this happen? Before I dive into the details of the project, let me clarify what I mean with ideas and knowledge. So a lot of the literature tends to focus on what is considered useful knowledge, that is science and technology. And that is, of course, for very good reasons. Because, of course, there's a clear link between this type of innovation and growth and sort of practical innovation and technological advancement. On the other hand, especially within political science, the focus has been on the diffusion of successful ideas, such as how did democracy spread? How did liberalism spread? Now, what I want to do here is different. What I'm interested in is studying the diffusion of ideas and knowledge across all fields. So this includes the humanities, also science and technology, but also the social sciences. And also, I'm not interested in understanding just sort of the spread of successful ideas, but also seeing ideas at their birth and understanding which ones then do spread and are successful and which ones die out and do not spread. So in order to get at this, I had to get the most complete possible picture of the intellectual landscape. And so to do this, Germany was also a great place because it was the first place to systematically record every publication from their publishers. And I collected the modern universe of bibliographic records, which includes in total 22 million items, as well as contemporary records. And so just if you don't believe that ideas matter, just the reminder, so for science and technology, we can see that the place where there is scientific publication, which is what the focus of this paper will be, those also tend to occur in the places where there's the technical innovation that we would nowadays consider through patents or breakthrough innovation. Okay, so as I mentioned, so Germany saw in this time period an increase in knowledge production. And you can see here, so here I'm plotting the number of titles we see there is an increase in the first half of the 19th century, and it really picks up in the second half, where with the number of new titles triplicating over 50 years. And just for reference, so in the UK, they roughly doubled in the same time period, and also between 1900 and the year 2000, they also only doubled. So this was really extraordinary, like the growth itself. Now, this, of course, had many causes, right? It's a period of change, there is unification, there is industrialization, the general sort of modernization phase. What I'm interested in is specifically the role of spatial connections, for the reason I mentioned. So in order to get at this, I need to get the shock to connections that is large enough as to significantly alter the way ideas are produced and diffused. So for that, I use the introduction of the railroad, and here I'm plotting its expansion starting in 1835.
One question. Is there a change in the technology of producing paper?
Yeah.
Also?
Yeah.
In this time period?
So the printing technology changes, like the sort of radical shift is going from sort of the manual printing machine to an automated printing machine. That happens in the 1820s and 1830s. The bulk of what's happening here is from the 1850s onward. So it's so there's still improvement, but sort of the main change in the printing technology occurs earlier. Yeah.
Just, what's your take on dividing this by the population? Not, I mean, not saying it's actually necessary method, but so does it make sense to think about it in an abstract total population?
Well, no.
The number of titles.
So per capita?
Yeah, is it?
Yeah, per capita it also increases, yeah. Yeah, and I have it somewhere, yeah. Okay. So and in part, maybe I can anticipate this, but in part it is because, more people are getting educated, more people have access to education, and more people are also producing books. So it's not just, it's in part people becoming more efficient, but also in part more people being able to write, yeah. Okay, so to preview my results, so first of all, do these special connections affect the quantity of knowledge production? And I do find, so here, this is where I try to get as close as possible to identification. So after recentering the treatment of the railroad, I find that there is an increase in the number of titles that are produced in a given city. And I also find that there is an increase in innovativeness, meaning there's more ideas on more topics, and in a way that it's more creative. And I'll go through this detail later, how I measure this. So how about diffusion? So you would expect that once cities become connected, well, then, people can move faster, their postal service is improved, the telegraph comes with the railroad. So ideas will diffuse faster and they will diffuse more. And then once you looked at what cities publish on, cities would become more similar as they would sort of copy each other. Now, it turns out that this is not the case. Which, of course, like as I found this out, I had a panic attack, right? It was right before the market. But like, there is a reason for this that sort of I hadn't considered, despite what my advisor had told me, that is specialization. So what I find is that, so scholars, in part there's more scholars, people get, there are more people becoming educated. Thanks to the railroad, they're more likely to move. And where are they going to move to? They're going to move to a place where there's already a cluster or a group active in the same profession. So you have these specialized clusters that form, and therefore cities diverge in their expertise. That's why you don't see them converging on the same topics, but rather diverging, each having their own expertise. Yes.
So you have two stories in mind. One is there is a change in technical composition. So industries become more specialized once they see become connected. And so this changes, and it could be just the knowledge market is completely separate from what's happening in the position, and so it's only within knowledge market specialization. Can you speak to that?
Yeah. So the point there is that you can explain with that, with just let's say economic specialization like drives the sort of knowledge production part. So that can explain like some disciplines like mining, sure, but. So the same effect I find also on the humanities or the social science. So so why would you, before like even theology, you would try to speak to a broader period in history. Now you really specialize on that one century or on that one saint. And that I find harder to explain. Okay, so what about diffusion? So I do find that ideas do diffuse within their field, even across cities. But they diffuse less across fields, even within the same city. And so the ideas that are successful at first, meaning that are able, so there is of course like a subset that is sort of very successful, that diffuses even more than before. Those they tend to persist longer, while the majority tends to die out. But this last point, you should think of it as a winner-take-all type of phenomenon where if you're successful at first, you're also harder to be replaced. So I argue that these in turn affect the increase of knowledge. So at the theoretical level, the fact that you have specialization, I find that there is an increase, at least descriptively, in the number of titles that people produce within this cluster. So these agglomeration effects kind of knowledge spillovers on the increase, so and therefore affect the increase of knowledge. But also I find that there is more combinations across cities. So say idea A is in city 1, idea B is in city B. It's more likely for those two ideas to be combined if they're in the same field. And so you can think of this as the type of recombinant growth. So new ideas being produced by combination of existing ideas. And so as I mentioned earlier, there is a consensus on modern disciplines arising in Germany in the 19th century. However, sociologists and historians of science do not have a clear explanation for why this happened. My explanation for this is that you cannot so you have a larger market, you have possibly access to more information. But if you go back to the theoretical specialization literature, you know that it comes with a problem. That is, you need to coordinate on who does what. And in this case, what does it mean for two people to do the same thing? So you need disciplines to solve, and so journals and clear ways of aggregating and distributing knowledge in order to solve the coordination problems that come with the possibility of specialization. Okay, so I'll skip the literature in the interest of time. I just want to stress what the contributions of this paper are, as I see them. So first of all, sorry. Okay, so first of all, so on the theory, so we would expect, so again, that with denser network, there would be more diffusion. That is often sort of an assumption I'm finding in the theoretical network literature. What I find instead is that, so there is sorting. And the way I explain this is you can think about this. So in this case, scholars, the agents in the model have access to more information. They're not going to adopt this information at random, but rather they are going to pick the information that is most useful to them because of informational constraints. So meaning you cannot just pay attention to everything. And you can think of this as a similar phenomenon as, the internet and social media, right? We're not all become an expert on anything, but we're kind of finding our bubble and just sticking to it. So in terms of data, I'll discuss it more detail later. In terms of methods, to the best of my knowledge, I'm the first to use persistent homology, which is a method that I borrow from topological data analysis to measure the closure of knowledge gaps or holes in a concept network and how long it takes to fill them. And then last, I see this paper as speaking to why science has become increasingly specialized. So the conventional wisdom is that as we know more and more, as we accumulate this knowledge, you need to specialize in order to make a contribution. So you need to sort of work on something small and smaller in order to know everything that you need to know in order to make a contribution. While this paper suggests that it's rather the contemporary size of the market, so the present knowledge being produced, that affects specialization. So the larger the market, the more you can delegate to the rest of the world what is the rest of the knowledge that can be produced, and you can focus on a smaller topic, and that is more efficient. Okay, so very briefly on the historical setting. So as I mentioned, so this is the time period in which you see the PhD, the standardized PhD being created, seminars being created. Germany did contribute to the rise of journals and once again the emergence of discipline. But most importantly, if you see the distribution of publication across fields, where here's philosophy and the humanities, here's science and technology, and here's social science. So in 1800, so right at the beginning of the period, you see that basically everything is philosophy, humanities, a lot of theology, and so forth. Now, if you move forward 100 years, the distribution has changed dramatically with the bulk of publication being in science and technology, but also social sciences, meaning, so what I meant with science earlier, it's not just, again, science and technology, but a more scientific approach also to the study of human beings, if you will. Okay, so the processes that I will be describing, there are some important historical preconditions that, probably if those hadn't happened, we wouldn't have seen the same. First, increased literacy because of school reforms. Second, we heard this actually earlier this morning, the research university, sort of this idea of Humboldt of incorporating research into teaching starts from the 1810s. But most importantly, the fact that publishing is sort of local and decentralized. So here I'm plotting before the introduction of the railroad, the cities in Germany that were actively involved in publishing, and you see there is hundreds of them. Why was that the case? The main explanation is that it was a function of the historical fragmentations into multiple states, and so each state had their own sort of intellectual center, and this persisted even after unification. And this is where the railroad was introduced in 1835, and you see its expansion so throughout the century, and especially after. Okay, so to give you a concrete idea of the type of processes that I have in mind, let me tell you the story of electrical engineering. So the father of electrical engineering is considered to be Erasmus Kittler, who was the son of a tailor born in a small place outside of Nuremberg 3 years after the railroad was introduced in this small village. He's able to move around a bunch to get his physics education, and then he creates the first electrical engineering department in the world, like not just in Germany, in the world. And he does so not in Berlin, as you may think, or Munich, but he does so in Darmstadt, which even then was a relatively small town. After this, he's able to attract students from all over Germany, but also from abroad. They all make major contributions, and then the students go and go make profits off of high voltage technology, electromagnetic force, batteries, and so forth. Now, this is one example of someone sort of created the center, a relatively small, medium-sized town, and it becoming sort of a world-class center for innovation in a specific subject. So this is one example, but there's other famous one. For instance, Göttingen, you know, so it was the place to study math and physics, or Weimar for arts and architecture. Okay, so moving on to the data. So first, as I mentioned, I needed to get the most complete possible picture of the intellectual landscape. So I collected from the Gemeinsamer Verbundkatalog, so it's a collection of all the libraries, research institutes, any kind of public collection of books. They have sort of a common catalog that entails in total 20 million items. Now, after you remove the letters, the postcards, the maps, the text that isn't, anything that isn't proper text and it's not written in German or Latin, the relevant number is around 10 million. As a shock to connections, I've collected railway lines opening for 10,000 for the first 100 years, basically, of the railway, as well as, so I've gotten 18,000 pages of railway statistics that includes actually hundreds of variables, of which I've digitized mainly telegraphs, passengers, trade volumes, and most importantly, there is also description, so it's in the stage, of the construction itself. So just were there delays, how long, when was a line planned to be completed, when was it actually completed, and if there were delays, why? And this is important and later for my identification strategy. And third, so I have information from about 230,000 individuals from the Deutsche Biographie. This is an example of the actual railroad data. For controls, I mean, I collected these newspapers, printing houses. I'm now incorporating population universities. Now I'm currently incorporating roads, canals, rivers, and steamship for my sort of measure distance. And then, so back to your point on publishers. So it could be, you know, that the specialization effect that I find is not because sort of people act differently, but the publishing industry changes. So in order to check that it's not sort of the specialization of publishers or the technology that could be driving this, I got detailed publishers' histories where I get technology and specialization. And I also collected many scientific discoveries. Okay, sorry, yeah.
It's my fault, but I'm kind of getting lost in the data now. It's amazing data. can you just restate the hypothesis?
So the hypothesis is, one, with the railroad, there's going to be more knowledge being produced, and there's going to be more ideas being produced. Specialization will increase, and then third, ideas will diffuse within their field, but not across their fields.
What about unobservables? So it might be that there is something like economic development that is driving the railroad and the diffusion.
Yeah, so that's why it was a real pain to get all this construction data so that I could get, again, as close as possible to identification. I'll get to that, like how I get to identification, I'll get to that in a second.
So to say it in a negative way, if there had been no railroads and everything else had gone on as, you know, then we would have seen less knowledge production and less specialization.
Yes, less. Yeah, I would say less, right? It's not that this is all because of the railroad, right?
I'm saying less.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then the main thing being that now people now are able to move, right? And so it's not just, it's the movement interacting with this increased education that allows more people to become scholars and those who specialize in.
You're saying the railroads allowed more sorting.
Well, first of all, for anyone to get the proper education and to be specialized in sort of work, sorting, yeah, exactly. The talent into the right place. So from the example before, like you would then, so this was like a guy who was son of the tailor, born in the middle of nowhere. It would have been very hard without the railroad for him to go anywhere, right? And
I see.
yeah, that's
So both more education and more specialization by place.
yeah. Good. No.
Once a degree.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm a bit confused about that, because if you think of moving to get an education, so the railroad may make it 1 day instead of 7 days, but 7 days doesn't seem to be that long
So
for an education, right?
yeah, so it's more, so this is not like my paper specifically, but other work argues that that it's not so much the sort of leaving, but it's more the mental cost of coming back. So now people like it's and you see it's not just the sort of the nobility who leaves now, like they do sort of so those who have moved before, they move more often now. But now there's also this whole other category of people who are able to move. They wouldn't even have thought of moving earlier. Like it didn't even occur to them, let's say, beside the cost and everything else. But there's also mental cost associated with leaving for the risk of not being able to come back.
So a related question that I think is also similar, like relevant to modern day, which is whether you could separate the effect here from the effect of the introduction of the telegraph.
So I did collect, so those appear in tandem. So you have the telegraph is being constructed where the railroads are constructed. So I collected sort of the intensity of the telegraphs, the number of telegraph stations, and I don't see a differential effect. Yeah, but whether you have more or less telegraphs. Yeah.
Sorry, but just on this story again, there's also, I guess you also account for the fact that it's still over 7%. So
Yeah.
you get education, but also you are able to visit here, and it's almost more intuitive.
Yeah, exactly. There's two mechanisms. So in my head, there is let's say, the short-term movement, and there's the long-term movement. The long-term movement being like you have this this formation of clusters, so you actually are close to the people who work on similar stuff. And I do see again descriptively that they tend to publish more, write more. Now on short-term travel, I can only see this indirectly about whether there's something published on a given topic in a certain place that is dropped somewhere else. Okay, so that, but then the question is, so if I'm trying to get that, new ideas. So one is just the number of titles. The other thing is I want to get is new ideas, right? So how do you measure that? Remember to have these bibliographic records, which include the title and basically a topic assigned by librarians. So how do you measure innovation with this information? So first of all, it could be that, very straightforward, a new word is created. And the fact that I'm working with German data really helps here because Germans create new words all the time. So for instance, once the cylinder printing press, again, going back to the technology, which was invented by Germany, by the way. So when it is invented, there is no new word in English, and you would have to deal with how what is the correct n-gram. In German, it's just one word, in the Druckmaschine. So as a first proxy, I use vocabulary expansion, again, as a proxy for new ideas. And, I do different things to take care of sort of synonyms. So this is, HTTP scan is good for that. And, trying to see if, if you think of broader topics, I use K-means for that as a sort of robustness check. Second, it could be that, it could be that there is no new word that is being created, but a new idea is reflected by the fact that two existing ideas are combined in a way that is novel. And here the example is tuberculosis and bacterium. So those two existed. Tuberculosis was it was thought that it was due to sort of a genetic disease. And it takes 54 years for those two words to be combined. And so this is what I call the closure of a knowledge gap. And I'll explain this in a second, once I get to those results. And then last, so it could be that it's nothing concretely or explicitly in a title is created, but rather it's more of a new topic or a new way that emerges. And so this example would be electromagnetism or administrative law or communism. And thankfully, I don't have to train my topic model because librarians already have like a system to categorize books. If you go to a library, books that are similar, they're physically close to each other. And so I exploit that to get at topics. Okay, so moving on to the results, so to get the increasing knowledge. So here again I'm trying to go as close as possible to identification. And what I want to get at is what is the effect of the whole railroad network on knowledge production in a given city?
Is the selection of the routes of the railroad exogenous?
No, yeah, that's not exogenous, but the delays are exogenous. So yeah, so so this is the point here. So first of all, I need to be able to capture the whole railroad network, and here I follow Donaldson and Hornbeck, where I use market access. So basically, they show that if you follow a gravity trade model, market access, so where you measure the relationship between one town with all the other towns, weighing the other towns by their population, and then sort of also considering how distant they are, that captures sort of the whole effect of the network. And here, so you can think, travel time, once two cities are become connected, travel time increases market access, and even more so if you're connected to a big city. So that's one. The second is the actual identification. And the problem is that if you're trying to get at sort of the effect of market access on knowledge production, it could be that cities that are more exposed, meaning that are more central in this railroad network, they may just be significantly different. So they may just be more productive. So in order to get at it, I follow what is in the past is the latest strategy that is to recenter treatment. And I do this
about your market access. I understand market access in Donaldson and Hornbeck because they're actually talking about the access to selling your goods or buying other goods or intermediate inputs or whatever. What's being sold? Why do we care about how big the town is, or if what you're thinking about is other scholars? I'm having a hard time mapping your thing to this.
Yeah. So the market access, so having other scholars, it means you could have possibly more people coming into your town and produce, and so that would mean better sorting, right?
No.
Yeah.
Explain why I care about market access. I'm having a hard time thinking about why I care.
So let's say if I have higher market access, it means I have sort of better access to people who can come and create the knowledge here. And I also.
Then don't you want to look at the number of towns or number of educated people, or the presence of universities or something, or how many?
Yeah.
A better proxy.
Yeah. So I've done I think all of that. So not the books, not the educated people. Sorry. So
libraries. I don't know, something that.
So I have the stock of. I've done it with the stock of books sort of for the whole period. That turns out not to be significant once you control for other things. Recent books, that's what matters. And then market access. This is like my baseline just because people know it. Like I can see why you would argue the baseline should be something else. Yeah, I should probably change that.
It would also naturally be just as opposed to having YK being the number of people, just the number of professors at the time. Just as count faculty in university would I think that's what you're trying to do, right? The exchange.
Yeah. So,
in your area
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
something.
yeah. So, I mean, I've done not professors, I could do, they're notable individuals. Yeah, so the point is you're saying change what your baseline is. Yeah.
At the same time, professors is only one making, right? You said it's also people getting education. Maybe it's.
Yeah, I mean, this is, so yeah, it's a kind of, like, the point here was to get at a proxy of how connected a place is, right? And so that is, you say.
But you're talking about connections in an intellectual universe rather than in a physical,
Yeah.
like it's, I want to sell to customers.
So, and the point, okay, so the answer to that is that, the recent books, so the books that are published, in the last decade, that's also, like, you can do that and it's still significant and it's still positive. Yeah, but yeah,
It would be nice to do just because, at least in Germany, many of the universities are small towns, you know, so
Yeah.
they would not have a big weight in your thing. And you would have a lot of weight in the rural area with us, the single scientist, you know, in that time. So if this works, it should be more precise, I think, if you would do weighting.
Yeah, so I've done that. So I initially done the sort of additional effect of like having a university. It's been a long time since I've done it, and it was sort of, you had an additional boost if you had a university, and if you had an additional boost if it was like in the same, if you were connected to places that were active in the same field. But so this is the baseline because this is what people normally do. I guess that's the best reason to have this as a baseline. But the point well taken. So in order to get an identification, so I exploit exogenous delays in construction. So the typical case, again, it's not that railway lines were constructed at random, right? It was also quite strategic, but it did happen very frequently that there were construction delays. In fact, like more than 10% of the railway lines took more than 10 years, and 15% of the lines were delayed. And so the idea here of tourist-centered treatment is to do the following. So it's the mental experiment is this. Suppose this is a subset of the actual railway lines that were constructed by 1870. Suppose the delays that did happen hadn't happened there, but they had happened somewhere else. So you would have a counterfactual railway network. Now you permute this multiple times and you get the average of that. That gives you how central a city is in the network, regardless of the specific construction delays and actual construction punctuality, let's say. So once you subtract that from the observed treatment, you sort of remove the centrality of a given place.
Question here is how did this entangle industrialization in the real world? I mean, my understanding from this period is that industrialization would push for specialization, right? So chemists, it was in manufacturing, there was a lot of demand for specialized knowledge. This is where most professional kind of organizations was trying to move out, and even the government efforts, which I think everyone probably controls. Would there be a push for specialization?
Yeah, exactly. So that's the point. Yeah, the point before, like, I mean, again, yeah, absolutely agree. And that might that explains in some part, like why chemists become more specialized. That doesn't explain why theologians also become more specialized. Now, the government, that is something separate that I've looked at for the bureaucrats. That's, you also see specialization in the state sciences, let's say, and that, so that also happens, I guess. But then there's also, a more general trend that I don't think that has been noted also elsewhere, that, the economic incentives themselves cannot fully explain. So the humanities, like, why would they need to become more specialized? I understand the economic incentives might, right, and they most certainly did, but that doesn't explain all.
Institutional system.
Yeah, if it wasn't that, so if you look at the intellectual history, so it turns out a lot of the specialization and the way that science was actually done started with linguistics and the humanities, and then it translated into the science. So this, I mean, it's so.
Within the institutional framework change, and the incentives within the organizations change.
Right.
Fields.
Yeah, but I mean, this has definitely been tied to the fact that the market for, so the number of students that you could have, and the fact that people are able to move and are able to get an education, and the fact that, you know, there's just more people, that this is like the key idea here, right? Like the connections themselves, so the points, but the point is that now the market becomes more unified, and that means you have more people, right? That's so, and people react to that.
I guess it could also be effective competition.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, there's more people, and so I better specialize in A, given that someone else is looking at B.
Yeah, exactly. So that was my point with, so earlier, with the fact that, you know, you need, like, it kind of works as like a normal market, right? Like you can see this as competition, or you can see this as delegating tasks, depending, you get the same result. Yeah.
Okay, but that was, I thought that was your explanation for why you would cluster in different areas. That's okay. I mean, I meant just there's we want to chop a field more finely. You know?
Well, you're both so if you have a larger market, you are better able to do it, and you have more incentives to do it. I guess that's, I think we agree on this. Yeah, that's the good way to solve it. Okay, so what is the effect here? So I find that with just a normal S, like checking market access growth, a relationship with the growth in number of titles, the elasticity roughly 12%. We're centering the elasticity roughly 8%. And if you consider the average increase in market access and the total growth in the number of titles, that will correspond to the railroad and everything, right? The railroad comes with an increase of 11% publication. So let me, so there's, I'm using modified event studies where I just check has a city become connected or not? Yeah.
So your titles are any book, or they're only scientific? So how do you narrow down what you actually look at?
So it's all books that, so I exclude novels because they're just novels. So any book that has like a clear category, again, from humanities to science and technology, that aren't novels, but anything else. Okay, so the summary here is that the number of new topics, as explained earlier, and the share of new words also increase. Now, to get at the combination of new ideas here, this is where I use the persistent homology part. So the idea here is I build a semantic network where every node represents an idea, so with one of these specific words, and I check how long does it take for two words to be combined in time. So how much time does it take for two words to be combined? And that represents the distance between any 2 points. Then I use persistent homology to measure the creation and extinction of knowledge gap. And maybe, so I have 2 minutes.
No, much less.
Okay, so the point here is that, so what you're trying to get at is these holes in the graph. So suppose these are your points, these are your words. You're trying to understand, so how long does it take for sort of the individual units to be merged? And that again is a function of the distance between the points. And so you'd see what it captures is, so how long does it take for each of these to be combined? But then also how long does it take for these new holes to be created? And then how long for also those holes to be filled? So this was very rough intuition. So, and again, like here basically what I'm capturing is how long does it take for disjoint parts of text to be combined? I'll just finish here. And so it turns out that it takes less time for these knowledge gaps to be closed after a city is connected to the road. Okay, and scroll forward. Okay, I'll just conclude. So what you should get out of this. So first of all, I find that spatial networks do not necessarily lead to convergence and diffusion, but rather with the interaction with this decentralized structure lead to divergence and sorting. So not necessarily more diffusion. And again, this should remind you of a parallel with the internet today. And also, so my point of understanding why science increasingly specialized. So again, my explanation is different from the burden of knowledge, which is the conventional wisdom. But why is it important and why is it maybe hopeful? So there's been previous work that links this increased specialization with less breakthrough innovation. So normally, so breakthrough innovation has been shown to be very interdisciplinary, and specialization comes sort of in between. So the fact that, specialization isn't something inevitable, meaning it's not that with more and more knowledge, you need not necessarily be specialized. It's more the present access to, or the competition, or like the delegation, if you will, to others that leads you to specialize, that feels less inevitable. And so if we think about how to, create this breakthrough innovation, that is a more hopeful situation. That's all.
Thank you.